Hello, welcome back. And today let's talk about Chapter 1 in our fine textbook, The Nature of Conflict. This is the opening chapter. We introduce some ideas here that will kind of really, in some ways, this may be the most important chapter of all because we have a definition of conflict that I want you to memorize. And if once you get a handle on that definition, it'll be so much easier for you to analyze what's going on in conflict and where the real problem is. I kind of like this picture here. I think I used it on the slides, a cat and the dog fighting. And so often we think conflict comes to this, two very different people, very different cultures. They even look different, and they have different goals and different things they're trying to do. And sometimes they just don't even like each other, and so conflict can arise from that. Well, let's try to get past that, and this is an animal type of conflict, and unfortunately, when people are young, this is more the kind of conflict you have, and as you mature and become an adult, we try to become civilized, we try to become human, and we handle conflicts in different ways. All right, I like this cartoon here. I hope you can read that. I'll post it on the website somewhere for you to look at it, but he says to her, I can't give you a raise because you're above the salary midpoint. Have you heard that before at work? You make more than the average employee. And your stock options are doing great. Well, I don't have any stock options, she says. Oh, I'm probably thinking of me. And then he looks at his sheet of paper. Next, it says I should coach you on interpersonal skills. Perhaps he needs to be coached on the interpersonal skills here. This is a typical work conflict here, and they have a problem with one another. She would like a raise. He says no, and he's going to turn things around and actually attack her and put her on the defensive here by the third panel. Isn't that tactic so common that people do? They go on the attack when there's something that really ought to be discussed rationally. And interesting how we do this. We have this human nature that we work against our whole lives if we want to be good at conflict. And you can get it civilized out of you, almost that animal nature, if you will, that we started with when we were young. So, your conflict skill depends on your interpersonal communication skills. Here's a main principle I want you to get. If you have trouble communicating with people, you're not going to be good at conflict. If you are a good communicator, you are probably already pretty good at handling conflicts, either in smoothing things out and finding solutions, or just simply in running over people, using words instead of threatening violence, but through persuasion. And really it comes to this. If you're good at communicating, you'll be good at conflict, one way or the other. Now, in the course, we want to steer you towards productive conflict and working with people that don't communicate well, and you can use your communication skills to help bring them out. If you're one of those people with poor communication skills, and I once was, very poor communication skills, my first wife let me know all about that within the first few months of our marriage after she got to know who I really was. And my wife now, I've been married to for 28 or 29 years, still reminds me that I don't always communicate. I don't say what I'm feeling or thinking. She has to drag it out of me, and I have to remind myself to communicate as well as I can. Sometimes I talk too much, like when I do lectures like this and they go on too long. And sometimes I say too much to people, and so I'm still learning this. You know, I'm not a great communicator. My family was not a bunch of great communicators. I think I have to look at my grandmother on my mother's side to find somebody who was a really good communicator. And we just didn't learn it at home, and that's why I started studying communication while in college, because I knew it was the key to advancement. And I can say, after getting out of construction and getting my degree in communication, I advanced everywhere I worked, and still not what I would say a natural communicator, a great communicator, but I understand the principles and I put them into practice as best I can, and I say I'm sorry quite often when I've blown something, and I do my best to keep relationships really solid with people. Okay, we study conflict here because we've got family. We have conflicts in our family all the time, and they just happen. It's natural, it's normal. Now, the type of conflict that happens, or the way that it goes from there, that can be damaging, or it can actually be healthy. If your family handles conflict well, you've come out with some good skills in that. I've had students that come from a family of lawyers, and the dinner table was just a big, giant argument, but they learn argumentation skills, and they come out of that family not hesitating to have conflict with people or argue their way through anything. Not necessarily the best way to resolve conflicts for the best of everybody involved, but they don't shy away from it. Other families damage you with conflict, and we come out of those families just avoiding things. We have conflicts in our romantic lives, in love, and especially when you're living with somebody, and there's going to be conflict there, but it's at maybe a deeper level than a brother or sister or a parent or a cousin or an uncle, whoever you're living with, and it strikes closer to the heart when things go wrong. We have conflicts with coworkers all the time, and they come and go, and we need to learn how to deal with those in the world. Okay, I want this class to develop your skills in conflict. That's the bottom line here, and you can develop skills in these. One of those skills, the book talks about emotional intelligence, really being in touch with your emotions throughout conflict, because emotions are part of the conflict equation that they're very powerful, and I hate to use that mathematical formula. Emotions can override your common sense sometimes with what you're feeling, and we need to become aware of that and understand it and keep it in perspective. Your maturity levels, now I wrote this in, this isn't from the book. I'm convinced that we learn conflict early in life. By age, we start at about age 2 or 3, start gaining some skills about age 4, 5, 6. We may be pretty well set in how we have conflicts by age 7 and 8. And we take those skills that we've learned, those tactics, those strategies for conflict, right into our adulthood. At some point, we stop growing in our ability to manage conflict. And perhaps it's because the teenage years for everybody are difficult emotionally for many people. As we figure out who we are and what kind of person we are, as we deal with self-confidence issues, and even the guys that really seem to be really self-confident, sometimes it's all an act, sometimes it's real. Other people are shy, but I think that's a point where we kind of rely on our conflict skills from childhood. I'm not talking about everybody here, but I think 2 standard deviations on either side of the mean in the general population deal with conflicts the way they learned when they were a child. And they do that through high school, and then they take those same strategies right into the adult world, or they recognize, I don't do this well, and they shut down and start avoiding conflict because they're afraid where it might lead, they're afraid what they might do. So part of this class is going to ask you to take that portion of you that does conflict and help that part of you mature and get integrated with the rest of your adult self that handles things in a mature way. Some of you are already there. I hope to hear about that in our discussions and see you encouraging others to do the same thing. Ideally, conflict prevention would be great. I recently read something that men tend to be problem solvers, but women are problem preventers. This is in the workplace when you have leadership and supervisors. Women see problems coming typically from early on, and they do what they can to prevent them. And men let things crash and burn all around them, and they rush in and fix everything and solve the problem. To digress a minute, that's part of why men get more credit for things than women do. And women should definitely speak up for themselves and point out when they have prevented problems if they want to move up and be promoted. But I think that same idea happens with conflict as well. If you can see the conflict coming and prevent it early on, don't avoid it early. If you can address it early and do some prevention work, you can really save a lot of time and trouble. I recently went through an organizational conflict where an organization I was part of was pretty equally divided about whether or not to dismiss somebody who is a central part of that. And the leadership of the organization, the upper leaders, did not handle things well, and they could have resolved it in one meeting early on, within a week after some of the inciting comments that were made in the initial incidents. But they didn't. They kind of wouldn't admit they made mistakes and wouldn't take what was clearly the right course of action, and decided to just analyze it to death for a month, and had a committee interview everybody involved that knew about it, what had happened, and then came down on, if you don't like our decision, you can just leave. That was how it came down, and it was just, could have prevented it all. Actually, 2 words would have prevented so much. I'm sorry. And hope you can remember those 2 words and keep them in your vocabulary. Sometimes people do things that they regret, and they need to not let it blow up into a large conflict like that one did. Sometimes mistakes are made that are really nobody's fault. No need to say you're sorry, but we made a mistake. I didn't foresee this problem happening. I didn't realize you would take it this way. Can we get at the heart of what goes wrong sometimes and do our best to prevent things from getting further out of hand by dealing with something quickly, early, and as decisively as possible? There are other conflicts that we'll get to in a minute that go deeper than that, and but if we can, 4 out of 5 conflicts probably can just be headed off early if you look for what's going on and are aware of it. Okay. Here's our definition of conflict that we'll use for the class. Conflict, interpersonal conflict, is an expressed struggle between 2 interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from the other party in achieving their goals. That bears repeating. Conflict, interpersonal conflict, is an expressed struggle between 2 interdependent parties, 2 or more, who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from the other party in achieving their goals. A key concept in this definition is perception. An expressed struggle means we put it on the table. I teach that we don't really have a conflict until somebody expresses that we have a problem, there's something to resolve, there's conflict. Somebody needs to express it. There can be a problem, and nobody's talking about it. I don't think that's really conflict yet. We can call that a pre-conflict if you want. And perhaps that's where you should address the prevention aspect of it and try to, before it gets expressed and things have a chance of getting out of control, if we can deal with it at that point still. But once things are expressed, I have a problem with what you did, then we can begin to move the right direction in solving it, or we have a conflict that's going now, that's on the table, that's expressed. The 2 or more parties have to be interdependent. If I go purchase something at a store and it breaks and it shouldn't have, and I take it back and I say, I want my money back, and they say, nope, looks like you broke it to me, and they will not give my money back. And I didn't break it, it came out of the box broken. And I walk away and I'm angry, and they won't resolve it, they won't give me what I want, but really, conflict is probably over. We're not really interdependent. I don't need that store, I can shop somewhere else. If I do need that store, either then I have to give in to them, or I need to go to the Better Business Bureau. We can escalate the conflict and go other ways with it. But the point I'm trying to make here is if you're not interdependent with somebody, conflicts don't last very long, and often there's no conflict at all. Many times we end conflict, we resolve it by saying F you, and we walk away. We break the relationship, we quit a job, we never go back to a store. What we're doing there is just removing interdependence, and we really want nothing more to do with that other party. I don't suggest we handle conflict that way. We don't want to break relationships and friendships and leave employers that we may want them to rehire us one day, or that may put out a bad word about us within our career trade. We're interdependent in more ways than we know. And so we don't want to lightly take that by just walking away and telling somebody to F off over our conflicts. When there is interdependence in two coworkers and you're working side by side, and you need this person to get their job done, they need you to get your job done, that's when we really have to dig in and do something about the conflict. But there has to be interdependence where there's no conflict. Incompatible goals, and this is where the perceptions begin. Incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference. We can perceive that our goals are incompatible, but maybe they're not. You want this, I want that, and there's not enough money to have both. In a department of communication, I want to buy some new equipment for a video program. Somebody else wants to buy new equipment for a computer, the computer mediated side of it. And the department chair says there's only this much money. We have incompatible goals, and now we have a conflict over how to spend that money. This happens in families all the time. It happens in couples that are sharing a budget. Incompatible goals over finances. Incompatible goals over where to go on vacation. Incompatible goals over who to hire for the open position at our company. Incompatible goals for the depth of a relationship. One person wants to go deeper, the other person wants to keep just friends and put you in the friend zone. Scarce resources are another place. It can be real or perceived. Sometimes we think there's not enough money, but perhaps with a little bit of shopping, with looking for something that costs less, we find out we do have enough money. Perhaps you can come up with more resources to procure what both parties would like to have. And sometimes these are some of the easier conflicts to resolve, because we can find ways to increase the amount of resources or to make the resources we have stretch further. Sometimes it's just a perception. We think there's not enough money to do everything, and we don't think it through and really look at a budget. Other kinds of resources, friendship and time. I want to spend time with you. You want to spend time with another friend of ours, and I feel a little bit dissed by that. Hey, how many people felt that in childhood at age 4 when your baby sibling was born and your mother didn't give you all the attention anymore? We have a scarce resource of time. And actually my wife helped our niece and her new daughter, or her older daughter, deal with the birth of a new baby. And my wife wrote a letter to our 9-year-old niece, who was really upset about her new baby brother, and because the baby brother was taking up so much of mommy's time. And my wife wrote her a letter and just explained what was happening and how much of a blessing that baby brother will be one day, and you're a big sister and that's a big responsibility. And she sent her a nice little silver pendant necklace with a turquoise stone on it. And conflict fixed. And so a little bit of mediation there, and our niece emailed us back right away and said, thank you so much. She's just been a different girl since that letter. Interference from the other party. And this is where conflict starts getting really active, and there's incompatible goals or a scarce resource, and the other person is obstructing, is not being cooperative with you in trying to resolve it, and interfering with what you want. Perhaps somebody at work is trying to get you fired because they fear that one of you is going to get laid off in 6 months, and they just want to get you fired and get you out of there. Somebody's lying about you. This kind of interference can be real, or it can be a perception on your part and not real at all. And a little bit of communication will bring out the truth of the matter, that no, I didn't mean that at all. I was not trying to undermine you. And this is why we solve these problems with communication. This definition then provides a framework for you to understand conflict. And typically, we have 5 bullet points here, and you can find within any conflict you're having, if you write out this definition and then kind of map out your conflict using this as a skeleton. What's the expressed struggle? Who am I interdependent with? What's my goal? What do I think their goal is? What do we have in terms of resources with this, in terms of time or money or ability or skills? And is there interference going on? Write this out, and you can usually nail down that this is about incompatible goals. Plenty of money to go around, but the goals are incompatible. We can't do both. It's mutually exclusive. We have 1 week for vacation. We can't go to New York and California in the same week. Sometimes it's about scarce resources. The goals don't conflict with each other, but the resources do because there's not enough. But this definition will help you pinpoint where the problem begins. And that is so important. And it also helps you be aware that it could be just a perception, and sit down, talk for 20 minutes with a cup of coffee may solve the conflict altogether and nobody's upset. Okay. That's the same cartoon. How did I get that in here? Okay. The nature of conflict. Conflict can be destructive. And there's a section of your book that talks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I don't really like that title for it or that metaphor. I prefer to just look at how this one idea here. The startup tone for conflict is critical. And if you respond in the wrong way, once conflict gets expressed and put up on the table, it's usually that second response that can set a pattern of destructive conflict, where things just escalate and get worse. Criticizing somebody usually is one way that starts, but they show this little model in the textbook that you need to be aware of. Criticizing leads to defensiveness. Defensiveness leads to stonewalling. The conversation, any chance for resolving conflict stops when you quit talking, and that leads to contempt, actual hating that other person, at the very least disliking what they've done, but usually it turns personal once people start taking actions. We take the actions in the wrong way. There's a concept from psychology called the attribution error, and humans pervasively make these attribution errors. We tend to attribute the cause of somebody's behavior to the wrong thing. It's usually either an internal cause or an external cause. Internal cause has to do with my character. External cause has to do with the situation. And what we do is when I look at you and we're having a conflict, or I don't like what I think you're doing, I will make an attribution error and I will attribute your behavior to your character. You came in late for work because you're lazy and you won't get out of bed. Actually, the truth of the situation may be you came in late for work because your car wouldn't start that morning and you had to call a friend for a ride, and you have an old car because your boss, I, don't pay you enough money to buy a nice car that'll run dependably. You look at the situation. You tend to look at the situation and attribute everything to the situation. We make excuses, but a lot of times the situation is at the heart of it. Sometimes character is. The point is with attribution errors is that we pervasively tend to attribute other people's behavior to the wrong thing. I call it character, and when you look at yourself, you'll call it the situation. When you're looking at me, I'll look at the situation and say it just forced me to do that. I will overlook any character flaws that I have. Typically it's somewhere in between for both of us. But that point right there leads us to start criticizing one another, because I think it's your character is why we're having this problem. We get defensive, we stonewall, and it leads into contempt. Escalatory spirals, you are so familiar with this. We learn this when we're kids. You say something mean to me, I say something mean back to you. You don't like it. You can't think of anything meaner to say, so you give me a little shove. I give you a little shove back. You shove a little harder. I decide to punch you. Each one of us is escalating thing. You punch me back, we punch each other, and then somebody bites somebody else. and at some point a parent or a teacher runs over and breaks it up, but things can escalate very quickly. We do the same thing with somebody at work. I'm working in construction, I have a pile of material at my work area and I'm putting stuff in it, installing it, and I turn my back and somebody comes over and they don't want to walk all the way over to the material trailer, and so they take some of my stuff. Well, next time I see them, I cuss them out, I escalate this a little bit, and then they tell the boss that I took a 45-minute break instead of 15, and we just start escalating something like this, and these things do get out of control. Everybody wants the last word, everybody wants to be one up in the conflict. This is something we have to be aware of and guard against. It's a human tendency to want to do that. We think we're resolving the conflict by escalating. Now, there are times when escalation is a good tool, but you need to learn when and where to use it. Sometimes just the threat of an escalation, a letter from a lawyer, can help resolve a conflict. Other times that leads to a spiral, and it takes some wisdom to see what's coming. But be aware of these escalatory spirals. Result of all this destructive conflict, digression into contempt, or these escalatory spirals, for a lot of people, means that I don't want to deal with conflict. I don't want to go there. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't do anybody any good. So I will just pretend nothing's wrong, or I will give in to this person, or I may escalate the conflict but do it very subtly, a passive-aggressive type conflict. I'm just not going to do what the boss told me to do. I'm just going to leave the task undone because I know it might get forgotten, or whatever it is. But it's because we want to avoid these situations. Well, looking at conflict and dealing with things up front and early, trying to prevent, recognizing what the real issue is, and trying to begin a discussion with another person before we have anything that escalates or before it goes into a destructive pattern, while we can still talk about it, before we get too emotional about everything, that is our best opportunity to get at the heart of resolving conflict. Okay, I think that covers what I feel are the main ideas in Chapter 1. Read it closely. I'll be asking questions from throughout the chapter, probably as evenly as I can, and take the quiz and do your best on it, and then we'll move on in the class to our other assignments for the week. All right, thanks a lot for listening, and we'll talk to you later.